There are moments in life that change everything. Moments so brutal, so unexpected, that they shatter your entire understanding of the person you thought you knew. For Michael Carter, that moment came on the worst day of his life, standing beside his mother's casket in a small funeral home in Canton, Ohio, when the woman he'd been married to for 8 years leaned in close and whispered words that would haunt him forever. "This is the best time to do this." She slipped an envelope into his trembling hands. Divorce papers. At his mother's funeral. While relatives stood barely 10 feet away, dabbing their eyes with tissues. While the organ music still hung in the air. While his heart was already broken into 1,000 pieces. But here's what Michael didn't know in that moment. Here's what made this betrayal even more twisted. His wife Jenna wasn't just ending their marriage. She thought she was cashing in. She thought she'd timed it perfectly. She thought that by striking while he was at his weakest, drowning in grief, she'd walk away with everything. She had no idea that the very prenup she'd insisted on years earlier, the one she'd designed to protect her assets, was about to become the shield that protected him. She had no idea that his late mother had seen through her long before Michael ever did. And she definitely had no idea that her cold, calculated move at that funeral was about to backfire in the most spectacular way imaginable. This is the story of how greed, timing, and karma collided in a small Ohio town. This is the story of a man who was too kind for his own good, a wife who mistook patience for weakness, and a mother's final gift that changed everything. Let's go back to where it all began. The receiving line at Miller's funeral home moved slowly that gray November afternoon. Michael stood near the mahogany casket, his mother's favorite hymn playing softly in the background, shaking hands and accepting condolences from people who'd known her for decades. Mary Carter had been a fixture in this community, a third-grade teacher for 37 years, a volunteer at the soup kitchen, the woman who baked pies for every church fundraiser. Losing her to pancreatic cancer at 64 felt like a theft. Michael's eyes were red-rimmed and hollow. He'd barely slept in the 3 days since she passed. His black suit hung a little loose. He'd lost weight during those final weeks of hospital visits and bedside vigils. His younger sister, Rebecca, stood beside him, her hand occasionally squeezing his arm when another wave of grief threatened to pull him under. Then, Jenna appeared. She'd been notably absent during the service, arriving late and sitting in the back row. Now she walked toward him with purpose, her heels clicking on the funeral home's tile floor. Her expression wasn't grief. It wasn't sympathy. It was something else entirely. Something that made Rebecca's jaw tighten. "Michael," Jenna said quietly, positioning herself between him and the next mourner in line. "We need to talk. Now." "Jenna, not here," he whispered, glancing at the crowd of family friends watching them. "Please." "Actually, this is perfect." She pulled a manila envelope from her designer purse, the one he'd bought her for their anniversary 2 years ago, back when he still thought they could fix things. "You're already surrounded by family. You've got support. And honestly, you're too distracted to overthink this." Michael stared at the envelope. For a few seconds, his grief-fogged brain couldn't process what was happening. Then she pressed it against his chest. "Divorce papers," she said, not bothering to lower her voice. A few heads turned. "I need you to sign them. Today. Right now, actually." The words hit him like a physical blow. His Aunt Linda, standing near the guest book, froze mid-signature. His Uncle Tom's mouth fell open. Rebecca stepped forward, her voice sharp and low. "Are you seriously doing this right now? At our mother's funeral?" Jenna didn't even look at her. "This is between me and my husband, Rebecca. Stay out of it." "Your soon-to-be ex-husband, apparently." Rebecca shot back, her voice rising. "You couldn't wait 1 day? 1 single day?" Michael held up a hand, stopping his sister. The fight had drained out of him months ago, maybe even years ago. He looked at Jenna's face, searching for some flicker of the woman he'd fallen in love with in that college coffee shop a decade earlier. The woman who used to laugh at his terrible jokes. The woman who'd cried happy tears when he proposed on the pier at Put-in Bay. She wasn't there anymore. Maybe she hadn't been for a long time. Why now? He asked, his voice barely audible. Why today? Jenna's expression softened just slightly, not with compassion, but with something that looked almost like pity. Because you need closure, Michael. On everything. Your mom's gone. Our marriage has been dead for years. This is the best time to do this. Trust me, you'll thank me later. The manipulation in her words was so casual, so practiced, that it took his breath away. She was framing this cruelty as a kindness, as if ambushing him at his mother's funeral was somehow for his own good. His hands shook as he opened the envelope. The papers inside were crisp, professional, already filled out. She'd planned this, prepared for it, probably had these documents ready for weeks, just waiting for the right moment to strike. There's a pen clipped to the front page, Jenna said. Sign on the highlighted lines. 4 signatures total. It's all very straightforward. Michael's sister grabbed his arm. Mike, don't do this now. Call a lawyer. Think about it. She's manipulating you. But Michael was already pulling out the pen. What was the point of fighting? What was the point of dragging this out? Jenna was right about one thing. Their marriage had been dead for years. They'd been going through the motions, sleeping in separate rooms, speaking in short, clipped sentences when they spoke at all. His mother's illness had just made the cracks impossible to ignore. Mike, please, Rebecca pleaded. He clicked the pen open. The sound seemed impossibly loud in the quiet funeral home. Around them, relatives had stopped even pretending not to watch. Some looked horrified. Some looked angry. His mother's best friend, Patricia, was crying again, but not for his mother this time. Michael signed. 4 times. 4 places where his full legal name was required. 4 moments where he could have stopped, could have told Jenna to go to hell, could have thrown the papers back in her face. But he didn't. Each signature felt like surrendering a piece of himself, like admitting he'd failed, like accepting that he wasn't enough, not for Jenna, not for anyone. When he handed the papers back, Jenna's relief was visible. Her shoulders relaxed, the tension in her jaw released. She actually smiled, not at him, but at the papers, as if they were a winning lottery ticket. Thank you, she said, slipping them back into her purse with care. This is the right thing, Michael, for both of us. You'll see. Then she turned and walked out. Didn't say goodbye to his family, didn't offer condolences one more time, didn't look back. Just walked out the front door of Miller's funeral home and disappeared into the parking lot, leaving Michael standing there, hollowed out and humiliated in front of everyone who'd loved his mother. Rebecca wrapped her arms around him, and he finally broke. Not just for his mother, not just for his marriage, but for the entire illusion of the life he thought he'd built. I'm sorry, he whispered into his sister's shoulder. I'm so sorry. You have nothing to be sorry for, Rebecca said fiercely. Nothing. She's the monster here, not you. But Michael didn't believe that. In that moment, standing in the shadow of his mother's casket, he believed he was the failure. The man who couldn't keep his wife happy. The man who chose his dying mother over his marriage. The man who just signed away 8 years of his life without even a fight. He had no idea, absolutely no idea, that Jenna had just made the biggest mistake of her life. And he had no idea that his mother, even in death, was about to protect him one last time. But to understand how it all fell apart, we need to go back. Back to when Michael and Jenna were different people. Or maybe when Michael just believed they were. It was the fall of 2011, and Ohio State's campus was alive with students rushing between classes, backpacks slung over shoulders, coffee cups in hand. Michael Carter was 22, a business major with decent grades and better intentions, working part-time at the university bookstore to help pay his tuition. His mom had insisted he go to college. She'd been the first in her family to get a degree, and she was determined her kids would have that same opportunity. Jenna Markham was a year younger, studying communications, with sleek dark hair and an easy confidence that turned heads. She came from a slightly wealthier family. Her dad owned a car dealership in Akron, and she never seemed to worry about student loans or work-study shifts the way Michael did. They met at the Daily Grind, a cramped coffee shop wedged between the library and the student union. Michael had been working on a group project, surrounded by papers and highlighters, when Jenna slid into the chair across from him. "You look like you could use better coffee," she'd said, pushing a steaming latte toward him. "That dishwater from the vending machine is going to kill you." He'd laughed, startled by her directness. "I'm Michael." "I know," she'd said with a grin. "You rang up my textbooks last week. You gave me the student discount, even though I forgot my ID. I owe you." That was Jenna in those early days, spontaneous, generous, charming. They started dating within 2 weeks. Within 3 months, she was wearing his jacket to football games and introducing him to her parents. Within a year, they were talking about forever. Looking back, Michael would realize they'd rushed everything. Rushed past the getting to know you phase. Rushed past the hard conversations about values and priorities and what they actually wanted from life. They were young and in love and convinced that was enough. By the time they graduated, Michael with his business degree, Jenna with her communications diploma, they were already planning a wedding. It was small, held at a church in Canton with 70 guests and a reception in the church basement. Michael's mom had helped pay for half of it, even though money was tight. She'd hugged him on the morning of the wedding and whispered, "Are you sure, sweetheart? There's no rush. You're only 24. "I'm sure, Mom," he'd said, believing it completely. "She's the one." Mary Carter had smiled, but something in her eyes had looked uncertain. Sad, even. The first year of marriage was good. Not perfect, but good. They moved into a small 2-bedroom ranch house in a quiet Canton neighborhood, splitting the rent and decorating with hand-me-down furniture from relatives. Michael got a job as an assistant manager at a regional supply company. Jenna worked in marketing for a local nonprofit. Money was tight, but they were managing. They went out to dinner every Friday, watched movies on the couch, hosted Thanksgiving at their place. It felt like they were building something. But then the cracks started. It began with small arguments. Michael wanted to save money for a down payment on a house. Jenna wanted to lease a nicer car. Michael thought they should budget more carefully. Jenna thought he was cheap and controlling. "My parents never worried about money like this," she'd snapped one night after he questioned her online shopping habit. "You make everything such a big deal." "We can't afford to spend $300 on clothes right now, Jenna. We've got credit card debt." "So get a better job," she'd shot back, and the words had hung in the air like smoke. Then came the real dividing line. His mother. Mary Carter had always been independent, too independent sometimes. She'd never remarried after Michael's father died when Michael was 10. She'd worked full-time, raised 2 kids, kept the house running. But by the time Michael turned 27, she was starting to slow down. Arthritis in her hands, fatigue that no amount of rest seemed to fix, medical bills that piled up after her school district cut retiree health benefits. Michael started helping, mowing her lawn, fixing things around the house, giving her money when she needed it. Never much, just $50 or $100 here and there to cover a utility bill or a prescription copay. Jenna hated it.
"Your mom is fine," she'd say, not even looking up from her phone. "She's got her teacher's pension. She doesn't need you playing hero." "She raised me, Jenna. I'm not going to let her struggle." "She's not struggling. She's manipulating you, keeping you tied to her." The accusation was so ugly, so unfair, that Michael had walked out of the room rather than say something he'd regret. That became the pattern. Michael would help his mom. Jenna would resent it. They'd fight. They'd go silent for days. Then they'd patch things up just enough to keep going. But the resentment never really went away. It just sank deeper, like roots growing through concrete, cracking the foundation. By year 5, they weren't partners anymore. They were roommates, polite strangers who shared a mortgage and a last name, but not much else. Michael tried. God, he tried. He suggested counseling. Jenna refused. He planned date nights.
She canceled. He asked what he could do differently. She said, "Stop prioritizing your mother over me." But he couldn't. Because when Mary Carter got sick, really sick, Michael knew he had a choice to make. And he chose his mother. It was early 2018 when the diagnosis came. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. The kind of diagnosis that doesn't come with hope, only timelines. The doctor had been kind but blunt. 6 months to a year if the treatment works. Maybe less if it doesn't. Michael had sat in that oncologist's office with his sister, holding his mother's hand while she cried quietly. And he'd made a promise right there. "I'm not going anywhere, Mom. Whatever you need, I'm here." He kept that promise. He took time off work, sometimes full days, sometimes just afternoons, to drive her to chemo appointments. He sat with her through the nausea and the exhaustion. He researched clinical trials. He cooked meals she could actually stomach. He held her hand during the bad nights, when the pain was too much and the fear too heavy. And Jenna? Jenna grew colder. "Your mom again?" she'd say when he told her he'd be late for dinner. "Of course." "She's dying, Jenna. And I'm your wife. Or did you forget that?" He hadn't forgotten, but he'd started to realize that the woman he married wasn't the woman he thought she was. The Jenna he'd fallen for in that coffee shop would have been compassionate, supportive. She would have understood that family mattered. This Jenna only saw what she was losing: his time, his attention, his paycheck, because helping his mom meant fewer overtime shifts, which meant less money for the things Jenna wanted. By the time Thanksgiving 2018 rolled around, they weren't even pretending anymore. Michael had invited his mom to their house for the holiday. She was frail by then, her hair thin from chemo, her energy minimal. But she wanted to be there, wanted to spend time with her kids and her grandson, Rebecca's boy, Tyler, who was 7 and adored his grandma. Jenna had agreed to host, reluctantly, but agreed. The day was tense from the start. Jenna barely spoke to Mary, barely helped with the meal. She stayed on her phone, texting friends, scrolling Instagram, making it clear she'd rather be anywhere else. At dinner, when Michael's mom thanked them for having her, Jenna had smiled tightly and said, "Of course, anything for family," in a tone so dripping with sarcasm that Rebecca kicked Michael under the table. Later, after everyone left, Jenna exploded. "I can't do this anymore, Michael. I can't keep pretending." "Pretending what?" "That I'm okay with this. That I'm okay being second place, third place, last place in your life." "She has cancer, Jenna. What do you want me to do? Abandon her?" "I want you to remember you have a wife," she screamed. "I want you to act like our marriage matters." "It does matter," he'd said, his voice breaking. But she's my mom. She's dying. How can you ask me to choose? Jenna's eyes had filled with tears, but they weren't sad tears. They were angry, bitter. You already chose, she said quietly. You chose a long time ago. And she was right. He had. But not in the way she thought. Michael had chosen to be a good son, a loyal son, a man who honored the woman who'd sacrificed everything to raise him. If that made him a bad husband in Jenna's eyes, then maybe he was. Or maybe Jenna was revealing who she'd been all along. The next few months were brutal. His mom's condition worsened. The chemo stopped working. Hospice got involved. And through it all, Jenna stayed distant, cold, checked out. She stopped asking how his mom was doing, stopped coming to the hospital, stopped pretending to care. Michael moved through those final weeks in a fog of grief and exhaustion. He knew his marriage was ending. He could feel it, but he couldn't focus on that. Not yet. Not while his mother was still here, still fighting, still needing him. So he let it go. Let Jenna drift further away. Let the silence stretch between them. And when his mother finally passed on, a quiet Tuesday morning in November, with Michael and Rebecca at her bedside, his first thought wasn't about Jenna at all. His first thought was, she's free now. She's not suffering anymore. His second thought was, I'm so alone. He had no idea that his loneliness was about to get so much worse. And he had no idea that Jenna was already planning her exit strategy. But the seeds of that exit strategy had been planted years earlier, long before the cancer, long before the resentment, back when Michael and Jenna were still engaged, still planning a future together, still pretending they were on the same page. It was the summer of 2013. Wedding planning was in full swing. They'd picked a date, booked the church, sent out save the dates. Everything was falling into place. Until Jenna came home from work one evening with a strange look on her face. We need to talk, she'd said, setting her purse down on the kitchen counter of their tiny apartment. Michael had looked up from his laptop, where he'd been researching honeymoon destinations they couldn't really afford. What's up? I think we should get a prenup. The words landed between them like a grenade. A prenup? Michael repeated, not sure he'd heard her right. Why would we need a prenup? Jenna sat down across from him, her expression serious. One of the women at work just went through a nightmare divorce. Her husband took half of everything, even though he barely contributed to the household. She's losing her condo, her savings, everything. And another girl, her ex tried to claim her inheritance from her grandparents. Can you imagine? Michael frowned. That's awful, but it could happen to us, Jenna interrupted. Not that I think it will, she added quickly, reaching across the table to touch his hand. I love you. I want to marry you. But we'd be stupid not to protect ourselves, just in case. Just in case, Michael echoed, the phrase settling uncomfortably in his chest. It's practical, Michael. Smart people do this. It's not about trust, it's about being realistic. He didn't know what to say. Prenups weren't something his family talked about. His parents hadn't had one, though his dad died so young it never would have mattered. His mom had never remarried. In his world, marriage was about trust and commitment. Adding a contract felt like planning for failure before you'd even started. But Jenna was insistent. Over the next few weeks, she brought it up again and again, showed him articles about messy divorces, forwarded him horror stories from Reddit threads about exes who'd destroyed each other financially. She framed it as protection for both of them. What if you decide you don't want to be married to me, she'd said. What if you meet someone else? Don't you want to make sure I don't take everything you've worked for? Michael had almost laughed at that. Jenna, I work at a bookstore and live in a 400 square foot apartment. What exactly would you be taking?
You won't always be at the bookstore. You're going to graduate, get a real job. Maybe we'll buy a house, start a family. I just want to make sure we're both protected. His mom hadn't liked the idea. When Michael mentioned it over Sunday dinner, Mary Carter had set down her fork and looked at him with concern. A prenup, she'd said. Michael, are you sure about this? Jenna just wants to be smart about it, Mom. Lots of people do this now. Mary had glanced at Rebecca, who was shaking her head in disbelief. It just seems, I don't know, sweetheart, it seems like she doesn't trust you, or like she's expecting it not to work out. That's not it, Michael had said defensively. She loves me. She just wants to protect what we each bring into the marriage. What are you bringing in? Rebecca had asked bluntly.
Student loans and a used car? Michael had bristled at that, but his sister had a point. He had nothing. No savings, no assets, no family money waiting in the wings. If anything, a prenup would protect Jenna, not him. Her family was wealthier. She had a nicer car, better credit, a small trust fund her grandparents had set up. But he loved her, and if a prenup made her feel secure, then fine, he'd do it. So he agreed. Jenna hired a lawyer. Her dad recommended someone from Akron, a sharp family law attorney who specialized in asset protection. They met in a cold, modern office with glass walls and abstract art. The lawyer, a woman named Ms. Brennan, walked them through the document page by page. It was dense, full of legal jargon, but the basic terms were clear. Any assets either of them brought into the marriage would remain separate property. Any inheritance either of them received would remain separate. In the event of a divorce, each person would leave with what they came in with, plus half of any jointly acquired assets, like a house they bought together or shared savings accounts. Spousal support would be minimal and time-limited. No long-term alimony unless the marriage lasted more than 15 years. This is pretty standard, Ms. Brennan had explained. It protects both of you, keeps things clean if the relationship doesn't work out. Michael had nodded, barely listening. He just wanted it over with. Wanted to get back to planning the wedding, the honeymoon, the life they were going to build. He signed. Jenna had smiled, relieved. Thank you for understanding. I know it's not romantic, but it's the smart thing to do. The smart thing to do. That phrase would haunt Michael for years. Because what he didn't understand then, what he couldn't see through the fog of young love and naive trust, was that Jenna wasn't protecting them. She was protecting herself. She was building an escape hatch, a way out that would let her walk away without losing anything if the marriage didn't serve her anymore. And Michael, raised on Midwestern values of loyalty and trust, had just handed her the key. The years that followed were a slow erosion, not the dramatic collapse you see in movies, but the quiet kind of falling apart that happens in daily life. Missed connections, small resentments, conversations that used to flow now halting and awkward. By the time his mother got sick, the foundation of their marriage was already cracked beyond repair. The cancer just brought everything into sharp focus. Michael spent the winter of 2018 living in two worlds. During the day, he was at work, trying to keep up with his responsibilities as an assistant manager, fielding calls from vendors and dealing with inventory issues. But his mind was always elsewhere, calculating how many hours until his mom's next appointment, worrying about her pain levels, wondering if he should take another day off. At night, he was at the hospital or at her house, helping her eat, helping her bathe, holding her hand while she cried about the life she was losing. Jenna barely acknowledged any of it. One evening in late January, Michael came home after a 12-hour day that had started at work and ended at the oncology center. He was exhausted, hollowed out. He opened the front door to find Jenna on the couch, watching TV, a glass of wine in her hand. "Hey," he said quietly, dropping his keys on the counter. She didn't look up. "There's leftover Chinese in the fridge if you're hungry." "Thanks." He stood there for a moment, waiting for her to ask, to say something, anything. Finally, He couldn't take the silence. Mom's not doing well. They're talking about increasing her pain meds. Jenna took a sip of wine. That's too bad. That's too bad. Like he'd told her the grocery store was out of her favorite yogurt. That's all you have to say? Michael asked, his voice tight. She finally looked at him, her expression flat. What do you want me to say, Michael? I'm sorry she's suffering, I am. But I don't know what you expect from me anymore. You're never here. When you are here, you're not really here. You're exhausted or stressed or thinking about her. There's no room for me in your life. She's dying, Jenna. I know that, Jenna snapped, setting down her glass. Trust me, I know. It's all you talk about, all you think about. I get it. She's your mom. But I'm your wife. Doesn't that mean anything? Michael felt something break inside him, something that had been holding on by a thread. Of course it means something, he said quietly. But right now, I need you to understand that I'm barely holding it together. I'm watching my mother waste away. I'm terrified every time my phone rings that it's the hospital telling me she's gone. And I need my wife to have a little compassion. Jenna stood up, crossing her arms. I've had compassion, Michael, for months. But you know what? I'm tired. I'm tired of coming second. I'm tired of planning my life around your mom's doctor appointments. I'm tired of feeling like a roommate instead of a wife. So what are you saying? She looked at him for a long moment, and he saw something cold settle in her eyes. I'm saying this isn't a marriage anymore. You made your choice. You chose her. Michael wanted to argue, wanted to explain that it wasn't a choice, it was an obligation, a responsibility, a love that predated their marriage and would outlast it. But the words wouldn't come, so he just nodded. Okay. Okay, Jenna repeated, as if she'd expected a fight. Yeah, okay, you're right. I did choose her, and I'd make the same choice again. Jenna's face flushed with anger, but underneath it, Michael saw something else. Relief. Like he'd just given her permission to check out completely, to stop pretending. Fine, she said. Then don't expect me to keep pretending this works. She grabbed her purse and her coat and walked out. Didn't say where she was going. Didn't come back until after midnight. And when she did, she went straight to the guest bedroom and closed the door. That was the night Michael realized his marriage was over. Not officially, not legally, but emotionally, spiritually, it was done. He just didn't know yet that Jenna had already accepted it too, and that she was planning her exit. March came, and with it, a brief moment of hope. His mother responded to a new medication. Her pain decreased. Her energy improved just enough that she could sit up, have conversations, even laugh a little. The doctors cautioned that it was temporary, a good week or two before things got worse again, but Michael clung to that hope like a lifeline. One Saturday afternoon, he brought her favorite soup from the diner near her house and sat with her in the small living room where he'd grown up. The room was full of memories, photos on the walls, her old piano in the corner, the rocking chair where she used to read to him and Rebecca when they were kids. How are you holding up, sweetheart? She asked, her voice weaker than it used to be, but still full of that motherly concern. I'm okay, Mom. She gave him a look that said she didn't believe him for a second. How's Jenna? Michael hesitated. He'd never told his mother the full extent of how bad things had gotten. He didn't want to burden her, didn't want her worrying about him when she was the one fighting for her life. But she knew. Of course she knew. Mothers always know. She's struggling, Michael said carefully. With all of this, it's hard on her. Mary set down her soup spoon and reached for his hand. Her grip was weak, but her gaze was steady. Michael, I need to tell you something. Mom, you don't have to. Yes, I do. She took a breath. I know you love Jenna. I know you've tried to make it work, but I need you to hear this. You deserve someone who sees your heart, who values your loyalty, who doesn't make you feel guilty for being a good son. Tears pricked Michael's eyes. Mom, I'm not finished. Her voice was firm now, the teacher voice he remembered from childhood. I've been thinking a lot about what happens after I'm gone, about what I'm leaving behind, and I want to make sure you're taken care of. I don't need you to take care of me, Mom. I'm 31 years old. You'll always be my baby, she said with a small smile. And I'll always want to protect you. So I need you to listen. I've updated my will. Everything I have, the house, my savings, the life insurance, it's all going to you and Rebecca, split evenly. But it's going to you, not to Jenna, not to anyone else, just you. Michael frowned, confused. Why are you telling me this? His mother's eyes grew sad. Because I don't trust her, sweetheart. I haven't for a while, and I need to know that if things fall apart between you two, you'll have something to stand on, something she can't take from you. Mom, you're talking like I'm dying? She squeezed his hand. I am, honey. We both know it, and I don't want to go without making sure you're protected. So promise me you'll remember this. When the time comes, when the lawyer reads the will, you'll know that I thought about this, that I made these choices on purpose. Michael's throat tightened. I promise. She smiled, satisfied. Good. Now finish your soup and tell me about work. I want to hear something normal. He did. They spent the next hour talking about mundane things. Office politics, Rebecca's plans to redecorate her kitchen, Tyler's Little League games. It was one of the last good conversations they'd have. Because 2 weeks later, his mother took a sharp turn. The pain came back with a vengeance. The medications stopped working. Hospice increased their visits. And 3 weeks after that conversation in her living room, Mary Carter passed away peacefully in her sleep, with her children beside her. Michael's world collapsed. But Jenna? Jenna saw an opportunity. The funeral was scheduled for a Friday. Michael barely remembered the days between his mother's death and that service. They blurred together. Phone calls with the funeral home, picking out a casket, writing an obituary, fielding condolences from people who'd known his mom for decades. Jenna didn't help with any of it. She stayed out of the way, claiming she didn't want to intrude on family business. But really she was waiting, calculating, planning. Because Jenna had done the math. She knew Mary Carter owned her house outright, a modest 3-bedroom ranch worth maybe $180,000 in the current Canton market. She knew Mary had a pension, knew there was probably life insurance from her years as a teacher, and she assumed that when the estate was settled, Michael would inherit his share. And because they were still married, Jenna assumed that meant she would get half. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that Mary had been very deliberate in how she'd structured her will. She'd met with an estate attorney 6 months earlier and made sure every asset was designated specifically to her children, individually, with no provisions for spouses. She'd paid for the life insurance policy entirely with her own funds, naming Michael and Rebecca as beneficiaries directly, bypassing any marital property claims. Mary Carter had seen through Jenna long before Michael did, and she'd built a legal fortress around her son's inheritance. But Jenna didn't know that. So when she walked into the funeral home that gray November afternoon, she thought she was about to cash in. The service had been beautiful. Heartbreaking, but beautiful. The church was full, standing room only. Former students, fellow teachers, church members, neighbors, person after person stood up and shared stories about Mary's kindness, her dedication, her love for her family. Michael had managed to hold it together during the service, barely. But the receiving line afterward, standing beside her casket, shaking hands and accepting condolences, that was breaking him. He was barely holding on when Jenna appeared. She wasn't crying, wasn't emotional. She walked up to him with purpose, her designer purse slung over her shoulder, her expression neutral. Michael, we need to talk. He'd looked at her, confused. Jenna, not now. Actually, this is the perfect time. She pulled out the envelope. Manila, official looking. You're surrounded by family. You've got support. And honestly, you're too emotional to overthink this. His brain was too fogged with grief to process what she was saying. Then she pressed the envelope into his hands. Divorce papers. I need you to sign them. Now. The words were surreal, like they were coming from underwater. Around them, people were starting to stare. His Aunt Linda, his Uncle Tom, his mother's best friend, Patricia. Rebecca stepped between them, her voice low and dangerous. Are you seriously doing this? Right now? This is between me and my husband, Jenna said coolly. Stay out of it. But Rebecca was having none of it. You're a monster. You know that? Our mother is lying in a casket 10 feet away, and you're serving him divorce papers? Jenna's face hardened. Your brother and I have been over for months. This is just making it official. And doing it now, when he's already grieving, means he can process everything at once. It's actually a kindness. A kindness? Rebecca's voice was rising. People were definitely watching now. You ambushing him at a funeral is a kindness? Michael held up his hand, stopping his sister. He was so tired, so broken. What was the point of fighting? What was the point of dragging this out? Why today? He asked Jenna, his voice hollow. She softened her expression, a manipulative mimicry of compassion. Because you need closure, Michael, on everything. Your mom, our marriage. This is the best time to do this. You'll thank me later. He opened the envelope. The papers were professional, detailed, already filled out with both their information. She'd been planning this. For how long? Weeks? Months? Sign on the highlighted lines, Jenna said. 4 signatures. It's very straightforward. Rebecca grabbed his arm. Mike, don't do this. Call a lawyer. Wait. Think about it. But Michael was already pulling out the pen that was clipped to the first page. The fight had left him years ago. Maybe it had never been there at all. He signed. First page. Second page. Third. Fourth. Each signature felt like giving up, like admitting defeat, like accepting that he'd failed at the one thing he'd promised to do, love someone for the rest of his life. When he handed the papers back, Jenna's face lit up with relief. She actually smiled as she slipped them back into her purse. Thank you, she said, almost cheerful now. This is the right thing, for both of us. Then she turned and walked out. No goodbye, no condolences, just gone. Michael stood there, numb, while his relatives stared in shock and his sister wrapped her arms around him. I'm sorry, he whispered. I'm so sorry. You have nothing to be sorry for, Rebecca said fiercely. She's the monster, not you. But Michael couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just made a terrible mistake, that he should have fought, should have said no, should have done something other than roll over and let Jenna walk all over him. What he didn't know was that Jenna had just made a mistake too. A massive, catastrophic, irreversible mistake. And she was about to find out just how badly she'd miscalculated. Questionable after the funeral, Michael sat in a conference room on the 3rd floor of a downtown Canton office building, staring at a man he'd only met once before. Gerald Hutchins was his mother's attorney, a soft-spoken guy in his 60s with kind eyes and a patient demeanor. He'd been the one who'd helped Mary update her will 6 months earlier. Rebecca sat beside Michael, her hand resting on his arm. She'd insisted on coming, said he shouldn't have to do this alone. First, I want to say how sorry I am for your loss, Mr. Hutchins said, folding his hands on the table. Your mother was a wonderful woman. It was an honor to help her with her estate planning. Michael nodded, not trusting his voice. Mr. Hutchins pulled out a folder, thick, organized, full of documents.
Your mother was very clear about her wishes, very deliberate. She wanted to make sure both you and Rebecca were taken care of, and she structured everything to ensure that her assets went to you directly, with no ambiguity. He opened the folder and pulled out the first document. Let's start with the house. As you know, your mother paid off her mortgage 7 years ago. The property is valued at approximately $185,000 in the current market. Per her will, the house is being left to you and Rebecca jointly. You'll need to decide whether to sell it or if one of you wants to buy out the other's share. Rebecca squeezed Michael's arm. They'd already talked about this. Neither of them wanted to sell their childhood home to strangers. Michael had decided he'd buy Rebecca out, move into the house, make it his own, start over. Okay, Michael said quietly. We can figure that out. Mr. Hutchins nodded and pulled out another document. Next, her savings. Your mother was a saver, Michael. Very disciplined. She has approximately $87,000 in savings and retirement accounts. That will be split evenly between you and Rebecca. After taxes and final expenses, you're each looking at around $38,000. Michael blinked. He'd known his mom was careful with money, but he hadn't realized she'd saved that much. And finally, Mr.
Hutchins said, his voice gentle, there's the life insurance policy. Your mother purchased a $250,000 policy years ago when your father passed away. She kept up the premiums faithfully. You and Rebecca are listed as equal beneficiaries. That means each of you will receive $125,000. The room went silent. Michael stared at the attorney, unable to process what he'd just heard. $125,000? Yes. The insurance company has already been notified and the payout process is underway. You should receive the funds within 4 to 6 weeks. Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. She never told us. She never said a word. She didn't want you to worry, Mr. Hutchins said kindly. She wanted you to be surprised, protected. She told me, I want my kids to know they'll be okay when I'm gone. Michael felt like he couldn't breathe. Between his half of the house, his share of the savings, and the life insurance, he was looking at over $200,000. It wasn't a fortune, not quit your job and retire money, but it was substantial, life-changing. And it was his, only his. Now, Mr. Hutchins continued, his tone turning slightly more formal. It's important that you understand how these assets are classified. The house, the savings, and the life insurance are all designated directly to you by name. They are not considered marital property under Ohio law. They're inheritance and beneficiary assets, which means they belong to you individually, regardless of your marital status. Michael's heart stuttered. My marital status? Mr. Hutchins looked at him carefully. Your mother mentioned that things were difficult between you and your wife. She wanted to make sure that if anything happened, if the marriage ended, these assets would remain yours. So she structured everything very deliberately. Your wife has no legal claim to any of it. Michael's mind was racing. The prenup, the divorce papers, Jenna's insistence on signing at the funeral. I just signed divorce papers, he said slowly. 3 days ago, at my mother's funeral. Mr. Hutchins' eyebrows rose. He signed them already? Has the divorce been filed with the court? I don't know. She just handed them to me and told me to sign. Rebecca leaned forward, her voice intense. So if the divorce goes through, Jenna gets nothing? She can't touch any of this? Mr. Hutchins nodded. Correct. Inheritance and life insurance benefits received by a named beneficiary are separate property. The prenuptial agreement you mentioned would further protect these assets. Even without a prenup, Ohio law would classify them as non-marital property. Your wife would have no claim. Michael sat back in his chair, his mind spinning.
Jenna had thought she was timing it perfectly, thought that by getting him to sign while he was grieving, while he was vulnerable, she'd secure her half of everything. But she'd been wrong. Completely, utterly wrong. His mother had outmaneuvered her, had protected him from beyond the grave. She had no idea, Michael whispered. Jenna had no idea. Rebecca's expression was somewhere between shock and grim satisfaction. Good. She doesn't deserve a penny. Mr. Hutchins cleared his throat delicately. I can't speak to what your wife knew or didn't know, but I can tell you that your mother was very intentional about all of this. She loved you deeply, Michael, and she wanted to make sure you'd be taken care of. She told me, my son has a good heart. I don't want anyone taking advantage of that. Michael's eyes burned with tears. His mother had known, had seen Jenna's true nature long before he'd been willing to admit it. And she'd built a wall around him, brick by legal brick, to keep him safe. Thank you, he said, his voice breaking. Thank you for helping her do this. Mr. Hutchins smiled. It was my privilege. Now, let's talk about next steps. We'll need to schedule a time to go over the house transfer,
Set up the estate account and make sure all the paperwork is filed correctly. But the most important thing I need you to know is this. You're going to be okay, Michael. Your mother made sure of it. For the first time since his mother had died, Michael felt something other than grief. He felt gratitude. And, buried beneath it, a spark of something unexpected. Hope. Word traveled fast in a small town. Too fast. Michael's sister Rebecca had always been protective. She'd watched her brother get pushed around by Jenna for years, watched him sacrifice and apologize, and bend himself into shapes to keep the peace. And she'd had enough. So when she met her best friend Lauren for coffee 2 days after the attorney meeting, she vented, told her everything. The inheritance, the prenup, the way Jenna had ambushed Michael at the funeral, thinking she'd get a piece of his mom's estate. Lauren had been horrified. And Lauren had a big mouth. Within 24 hours, it was all over their social circle. Within 48 hours, it had reached mutual friends who still spoke to Jenna. And by the end of the week, Jenna knew. She showed up at Michael's workplace on a Tuesday afternoon, her face flushed with anger, her movements sharp and aggressive. Michael was in the parking lot, about to get into his car after his shift, when she stormed up to him. "You lied to me," she shouted, not caring who heard. A couple of coworkers loading equipment into a truck stopped and stared. Michael turned, startled. "Jenna? What are you—" "You inherited money. A lot of money. And you didn't tell me." His stomach dropped. How did I find out? Really? That's what you're worried about?" She stepped closer, her voice rising. "You were supposed to tell me. We're married, Michael. Or we were when your mom died, which means I have a right to that money." Michael felt a strange calm settle over him. It was the calm of someone who'd been pushed too far, someone who'd finally seen the truth and couldn't unsee it. "You don't," he said simply. "Excuse me? You don't have a right to it, Jenna. It's inheritance, left directly to me by my mother. It's not marital property." Her face twisted with fury. "That's bullshit. We were still married when she died. Under Ohio law, I'm entitled to half of everything." "No, you're not." Michael kept his voice steady, even as his hands shook. "I spoke to the attorney. Inheritance and life insurance benefits are separate property. The prenup reinforces that. You don't get any of it." Jenna's mouth fell open. For a moment, she just stared at him, processing. Then her expression shifted from anger to panic. "Wait, no, that's not—" She pulled out her phone, fumbling with it. "I talked to someone. They said—" "They were wrong," Michael said. "Or maybe you didn't give them the full story. Either way, it doesn't matter. The law is clear, and so is the prenup. The prenup you insisted on. The one you made me sign because you wanted to protect your assets." The realization washed over her face like cold water. "That's not fair." "Fair?" Michael's voice hardened. You served me divorce papers at my mother's funeral, Jenna. You stood beside her casket and told me it was the best time to do this. And now you're mad because you're not getting money that was never yours to begin with? I'm your wife, she shouted, and heads were definitely turning now. People were watching from the loading dock, from the office windows. Not for much longer, Michael said quietly. You made sure of that. Jenna's panic was morphing into desperation. Michael, wait. Let's talk about this. We don't have to get divorced. We can work this out. I was emotional at the funeral. I wasn't thinking clearly. We can fix this. He almost laughed. Fix it? Jenna, you've spent the last 2 years making it very clear that you resent me, my family, and every choice I've ever made. You didn't visit my mom in the hospital. You didn't help plan the funeral. And when she died, the first thing you did was try to manipulate me into signing papers while I was drowning in grief. There's nothing to fix. But go home, Jenna, or go to your lawyer. I don't care. But this conversation is over. He turned to get into his car, but she grabbed his arm. Michael, please. I made a mistake. I'm sorry. I was angry and hurt, and I wasn't thinking. You were thinking, he said, pulling his arm free. You were thinking very clearly. You wanted out, and you wanted to cash in while you were at it. The problem is, there's nothing to cash in on. The house is mine. The insurance is mine. The savings are mine. And the prenup, the one you demanded, make sure you can't touch any of it. Jenna's face crumpled. For the first time since he'd known her, she looked genuinely afraid. What am I supposed to do? I don't know, Michael said honestly. But that's not my problem anymore. He got into his car, started the engine, and drove away, leaving her standing in the parking lot, alone. For the first time in years, Michael felt something he'd almost forgotten. Power. Not over her, but over his own life. Jenna didn't go quietly. Within a week, she hired a lawyer, a sharp, aggressive divorce attorney from Akron named Dennis Carver, who specialized in high-asset divorces. Jenna had framed the situation to make it sound like Michael was hiding money, that he'd tricked her, that she deserved a portion of the inheritance because they'd been married when his mother died. Carver took the case, probably smelling an easy payday. He filed a motion to contest the prenup, arguing it had been signed under duress, that Jenna hadn't fully understood what she was agreeing to, and that Michael had taken advantage of her youth and inexperience. It was a Hail Mary, a desperate attempt to overturn a legally binding agreement. But it meant Michael had to lawyer up too. He hired Patricia Gomez, a no-nonsense family law attorney recommended by his mother's estate lawyer. Patricia was in her 50s, with gray-streaked hair and a reputation for destroying manipulative exes in court. Their first meeting was in her office, a tidy space filled with law books and framed degrees. Patricia had already reviewed the prenup, the will, and the divorce papers Jenna had served. She doesn't have a case, Patricia said bluntly, tapping her pen on the prenup document. This agreement is airtight. It was drafted by a licensed attorney, signed voluntarily by both parties, and you both had time to review it. There's no evidence of coercion or fraud, and even if we threw out the prenup entirely, inheritance is still separate property under Ohio law. So why is she fighting it? Michael asked. Because she's desperate, Patricia said, and because she's angry. Her lawyer probably told her it's a long shot, but he's getting paid either way. She's hoping you'll settle just to avoid the hassle. I'm not settling, Michael said firmly. Patricia smiled. Good, because we're going to bury her. The next few months were exhausting. Court hearings, depositions, document requests. Jenna's lawyer tried every angle, claiming Michael had hidden the inheritance, that he'd manipulated his mother into excluding Jenna from the will, that the prenup was unconscionable and should be voided. But Patricia came armed with evidence. She had emails, texts, messages Jenna had sent to friends complaining about Michael's obsession with his mother. Messages where Jenna had talked about waiting him out until his mom died so they could move on.
Messages where she'd literally said, "Once she's gone, we can finally focus on us, or I can focus on me." In one particularly damning exchange, Jenna had texted a coworker, "His mom is taking forever to die. I know that sounds awful,
But I'm so over this. The judge's face had tightened when that text was read into the record. Patricia also brought in witnesses. Rebecca testified about the funeral ambush. Michael's Aunt Linda described watching Jenna serve divorce papers beside the casket. Even one of the church members who'd been standing nearby gave a statement about how cruel and calculated it had seemed. And then there was the prenup itself. Patricia pulled out copies of the emails Jenna had sent when they were engaged. Messages to Michael where she'd explicitly pushed for the prenup, citing examples of messy divorces and insisting it was the smart thing to do. Messages where she'd said, "I want to protect what's mine, and you should too." "Your Honor," Patricia said during the final hearing, her voice calm and measured, "Ms. Markham is asking this court to void a prenuptial agreement that she herself demanded, an agreement she insisted on to protect her assets, an agreement she had reviewed by legal counsel before signing. The only reason she wants it thrown out now is because it's protecting her husband instead. That is not grounds for voiding a contract. That's just buyer's remorse." Jenna's lawyer tried to argue, tried to claim she'd been young and naive, tried to paint Michael as a manipulator, but the evidence didn't support it. The timeline didn't support it, and the judge wasn't buying it. After 2 hours of arguments, the judge made his ruling. "I've reviewed the prenuptial agreement in question, and I find it to be valid and enforceable. Both parties were represented by counsel or had the opportunity to be. Both parties signed voluntarily. There is no evidence of coercion, fraud, or unconscionability. The agreement will stand." Jenna's face went white. The judge continued, "Furthermore, I find that the inheritance received by Mr. Carter from his late mother is separate property under Ohio law. It is not subject to division in this divorce. Ms. Markham has no claim to those assets." He looked at Jenna over his reading glasses, and his expression was stern. "Ms. Markham, I'll be frank. The evidence presented in this case paints a troubling picture. You chose to serve divorce papers at your husband's mother's funeral. You timed your filing based on an assumption that you would receive a portion of his inheritance, and when that didn't work out, you tried to undo the very prenup you insisted on. That kind of calculated behavior does not reflect well on your character, and it certainly does not warrant judicial intervention to give you a financial windfall you were never entitled to." Jenna's lawyer opened his mouth to object, but the judge held up a hand. "I'm not finished. The prenuptial agreement explicitly states that spousal support will be minimal and time-limited. Given the length of your marriage, 8 years, and the lack of any substantial jointly acquired assets, I'm ordering spousal support in the amount of $400 per month for a period of 12 months. After that, Ms. Markham, you're on your own." $400 a month. For 1 year. Less than $5,000 total. Jenna's face crumpled. She turned to her lawyer, whispering frantically, but he just shook his head. There was nothing more to be done. The judge signed the order. "This divorce is granted. Mr. Carter, you are free to go. Ms. Markham, I suggest you move forward with your life and leave your ex-husband alone." Michael felt a weight lift off his chest. It was over. Really, truly over. Patricia leaned over and whispered, "Congratulations, you're free." Jenna stormed out of the courtroom without looking at him. Her lawyer followed, probably already calculating how much he could bill her for a losing case. And Michael? Michael walked out into the cold February afternoon, took a deep breath, and smiled. The fallout in their small community was swift and brutal. Word spread about what had happened in court, about the texts, about the funeral, about Jenna's calculated attempt to cash in on her dying mother-in-law's estate. People talked. At the grocery store, at the gym, at church, at the local coffee shop where Jenna used to meet friends. Her reputation didn't just take a hit, it imploded. Friends stopped calling. Coworkers avoided her in the break room. Even her own family started distancing themselves when they heard the full story. Her mother, Carol, called Michael 2 weeks after the court ruling. It was an awkward, painful conversation. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry," Carol said, her voice tight with emotion. "I didn't raise her to be like this. I didn't know she was capable of what she did." "I appreciate that, Carol," Michael said quietly. "But you don't have to apologize for her. She's an adult." "I know. I'm ashamed. Your mother was a lovely woman. And what Jenna did at the funeral, I didn't even know until after the court case. She didn't tell us." "I figured," Carol sighed. "She's my daughter, and I love her. But she's wrong. She was wrong. And I don't blame you for not wanting anything to do with her." Michael didn't know what to say to that, so he just thanked her for calling and let her go. Jenna, meanwhile, spiraled. According to mutual friends who still had loose connections, she'd moved into a small apartment on the other side of town. She was struggling to pay rent on her nonprofit salary. Turned out that $400 a month in spousal support didn't go far when you were used to splitting expenses with someone else. She'd tried to reach out to Michael a few times. Texts that started apologetic and ended accusatory. Voicemails that ranged from tearful to angry. He blocked her number after the third one. Michael, on the other hand, was rebuilding. He used part of the inheritance to pay off the credit card debt they'd accumulated during the marriage, paid off his car, set aside money for property taxes and maintenance on his mother's house, which was now officially his. Rebecca had agreed to let him buy her half with part of his inheritance, keeping it in the family. He spent weekends fixing up the house, painting the guest room, replacing the old kitchen faucet, planting flowers in the garden his mom had loved. It was therapeutic, in a way, like he was honoring her memory with every repair, every improvement. And he started saying no. No to friends who wanted to borrow money just until payday. No to family members who thought he should spread his inheritance around. No to people who suggested he give Jenna a little something to help her out. She made her choices, he told his sister one evening over dinner. I'm not responsible for fixing them. Rebecca raised her glass. Damn right. One afternoon in early spring, Michael was working in the front yard, pulling weeds from the flower beds, when his nephew Tyler came running up the driveway. Uncle Mike! Uncle Mike! Mom says you're going to help me with my school project. Michael laughed, wiping dirt off his hands. Oh, she did she? Rebecca walked up behind Tyler, smiling. If you're not too busy being a homeowner. Never too busy for this guy, Michael said, ruffling Tyler's hair. What's the project? Family trees. I gotta make a poster with all our relatives and stuff. Mom said you'd have pictures of Grandma. Michael's chest tightened, but it was a good ache, a warm one. Yeah, buddy. I've got tons of pictures. Let's go inside and I'll show you. They spent the afternoon going through old photo albums, Tyler asking a million questions about who everyone was and where they lived. Michael told stories about his mom, about her terrible cooking, her terrible singing, her incredible ability to make everyone feel loved. And for the first time since she died, talking about her didn't just hurt. It felt good, like keeping her alive through the memories. Rebecca watched from the doorway, smiling. You're doing good, Mike. Yeah, he said softly. I think I am. Time passed. Seasons changed. Michael didn't date for a while. He wasn't ready, wasn't interested. He needed time to heal, to figure out who he was outside of his failed marriage, to rebuild a life that felt like his own. He started therapy in the summer, found a good counselor who specialized in grief and relationship trauma. It was hard at first, talking about his feelings, his guilt, his tendency to put everyone else's needs before his own. But slowly, things started to shift. He learned to recognize his own patterns, the way he'd bent over backward to keep Jenna happy, even when it meant sacrificing his own well-being.
the way he'd ignored red flags because he didn't want to admit he'd made a mistake, the way he'd let guilt drive his decisions instead of self-respect. "You're a people pleaser," his therapist, Dr. Ramos, said gently during one session. "You were raised to be kind and selfless, which are wonderful qualities, but you took it too far. You gave so much of yourself that there was nothing left." Michael nodded. "So how do I fix that?" "You set boundaries. You practice saying no. You recognize that being kind doesn't mean being a doormat." It was easier said than done, but he worked at it, practiced, stumbled, got better. By the fall, Michael was in a different place. Not perfect, not fully healed, but stronger, more sure of himself. He'd started volunteering at the local community center, helping with their after-school tutoring program. It was something his mom used to do, and it felt right. Felt like honoring her legacy. One evening in October, he was packing up his things after a tutoring session when a woman approached him. She was around his age, with kind eyes and an easy smile. "You're really good with the kids," she said. "I'm Emily, by the way. I coordinate the literacy program." "Michael," he shook her hand.
Thanks, I'm still figuring it out, but I like it. "Well, you're a natural." She hesitated, then added, "A few of us are grabbing coffee after this if you want to join, just to unwind and talk shop." Michael almost said no, almost made an excuse, but then he remembered Dr. Ramos's voice. "You have to let people in again, Michael. Not everyone is Jenna." "Sure," he said, surprising himself. "That sounds nice." Coffee turned into a regular thing. Emily and a few other volunteers met every week, and Michael started joining them. It was casual, low pressure, no expectations. He and Emily became friends. She was easy to talk to, funny, and refreshingly honest. She'd been through her own divorce a few years earlier and didn't shy away from talking about the hard stuff. "My ex was a liar," she said one evening over coffee. "Lied about money, about where he was going, about who he was with. It took me 2 years to trust anyone again." "How did you do it?" Michael asked. "Therapy, time, and a lot of bad first dates," she said with a laugh. "But eventually I realized I couldn't let one terrible person ruin the rest of my life. So I started over, set boundaries, made a list of deal breakers, and decided I'd rather be alone than settle for less than I deserve." Michael smiled. "That's smart." "It's survival," she said. "But yeah, I'll take smart." They didn't rush into anything, didn't jump from friendship to relationship overnight. But over the months, something shifted, something easy and natural. And when Emily asked if he wanted to grab dinner, just the two of them, not the group, Michael said yes without hesitation. It wasn't love at first sight. It wasn't a fairy tale. But it was real and honest and built on a foundation of mutual respect and clear boundaries. And that was enough. 2 years after his mother's death, Michael stood in the living room of his house, his childhood home, now fully his, and looked around at what he'd built. Those walls were painted a warm gray. The furniture was a mix of his mom's old pieces and things he'd picked up over the last year. Photos lined the mantel, his mom, his sister, his nephew. New memories and old ones, side by side. It was home. Rebecca came over for dinner that night, bringing Tyler and her husband Dan. They ate spaghetti and garlic bread, Tyler talking nonstop about his baseball team and his upcoming birthday. After dinner, Rebecca pulled Michael aside in the kitchen while Dan helped Tyler with homework in the living room. "You look happy," she said. Michael smiled. "I am. I really am." "I'm glad." She squeezed his arm. "You deserve it, Mike." After everything you went through, you deserve to be happy. Thanks, Beck. She hesitated, then asked, Have you heard anything about Jenna? Michael shook his head. No, and I don't want to. Fair. I ran into her mom at the grocery store last week. She said Jenna moved to Columbus, got a new job, new apartment, the whole deal. Good for her, Michael said, and he meant it. Not in a bitter way, just in a that's not my problem anymore way. Rebecca studied his face. You really don't care, do you? I really don't. Michael leaned against the counter. She made her choices. I made mine. And I'm happier now than I've been in years. That's all that matters. What about Emily? Rebecca asked with a knowing smile. Michael felt his face warm. What about her? Oh, come on. You've been seeing her for months. Is it serious? It's good. Really good. We're taking it slow, but yeah, I think it could be serious. Rebecca grinned. Good. She seems great. Way better than... Don't say her name, Michael interrupted, laughing. I wasn't going to, Rebecca said innocently. I was going to say, way better than anyone you've dated before. Smooth. I try. Later that night, after everyone had gone home, Michael sat on the back porch with a beer, looking out at the yard. The stars were bright, the air was cool, and for the first time in a long time, he felt at peace. His phone buzzed, a text from Emily. Hope you had a good night. See you Thursday? He smiled and typed back. Absolutely, can't wait. He set the phone down and took a sip of his beer. Life wasn't perfect. He still missed his mom, still had days where the grief hit hard, still carried scars from his marriage to Jenna, but he was okay, better than okay. He was free. So here's the thing about this story. Here's the part that matters. Michael's story isn't really about money. It's not about winning in court or getting revenge on an ex-wife. It's about something deeper. It's about the difference between love and manipulation, between loyalty and exploitation, between kindness and weakness. For years, Michael thought being a good husband meant sacrificing everything: his time, his energy, his relationship with his mother. He thought if he just gave enough, tried hard enough, Jenna would love him the way he loved her. But love isn't a transaction, and respect isn't something you can earn by shrinking yourself. Jenna didn't see Michael's loyalty as a strength. She saw it as a tool, something she could use, something she could exploit. And when his mother was dying, when he needed support, compassion, basic human decency, Jenna saw an opportunity, a chance to strike while he was vulnerable and walk away with what she thought was a payday. She was so focused on the money, on the timing, on manipulating him into signing those papers that she forgot one crucial detail: the prenup she had demanded, the legal document she had insisted on to protect her assets. That prenup became the very thing that protected him. Irony? Sure, but also justice. Because Michael's mother saw what he couldn't. She saw Jenna's true nature. She saw the resentment, the entitlement, the coldness, and she made sure her son would be protected even after she was gone. That's love. Real love. The kind that doesn't demand anything in return. The kind that protects without being asked. And here's the other thing. Michael could have been bitter. He could have used his inheritance to rub it in Jenna's face, to flaunt his newfound financial security, to make her life harder. But he didn't. He paid off debt, fixed up his mom's house, created a college fund for his nephew, volunteered in his community, rebuilt his life with integrity and quiet dignity. He chose healing over revenge, growth over bitterness, and in doing that, he honored his mother's memory in the best possible way. So what's the lesson here? First, never underestimate a mother's love. Mary Carter knew exactly what she was doing when she updated that will. She protected her son with her last act of love, and it changed everything. Second, the protection you put in place just in case can save you in ways you never expect. That prenup Jenna demanded? It became Michael's shield. Third, timing isn't everything. Jenna thought serving divorce papers at a funeral was strategic, thought she'd catch Michael at his weakest and get what she wanted. But all she did was reveal her true character to everyone watching. And when it came time for court, that moment of cruelty destroyed her case. And finally, money doesn't change people. It reveals them. Jenna thought she was entitled to Michael's inheritance because they'd been married. But when the law said no, when the prenup said no, when the judge said no, she showed exactly who she was. Someone who valued money over decency, over compassion, over basic human respect. Michael, on the other hand, used his inheritance to build a better life. Not a flashier one, not a more vengeful one, just a better, healthier, more honest one. And that's the real victory. So here's the question for you. What would you have done in that moment? Standing beside your mother's casket, numb with grief, when your spouse handed you divorce papers and said, "This is the best time to do this." Would you have signed? Would you have fought? Would you have walked away? And here's the bigger question. Do you think Jenna deserved a second chance? Should Michael have forgiven her? Should he have split the inheritance with her, even though the law said he didn't have to? Or did she get exactly what she deserved? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Tell us what you think. Tell us what state you're watching from. And if this story moved you, if it made you think, if it reminded you that integrity matters more than money, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because at the end of the day, this isn't just a story about a funeral, a divorce, and an inheritance. It's a story about what happens when greed meets karma. And sometimes, just sometimes, karma wins.